I'm here with James Fox. We're sticking around for a little bit of follow up from our previous, the first part of our interview, which will appear on YouTube and KGRA Radio and probably get copied and pasted elsewhere on the web. But James is with me from, by the way, where are you exactly?
I am in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
I actually live in a little coastal fishing village about an hour or so north of San Francisco. Most people don't even know the name of my town. I mean, it's gotten more popular in the last decade or two, but it's so hidden and off the grid. I mean, we're like a little, population 2,500. In the last couple of years, some very influential people like the Coen brothers have moved in. They're very nice, though. There's Francis McDormand and the Coen brothers and.
Well, that's interesting, but I wasn't talking about that. I'm talking about like where are you right now? You're on a hilltop, getting a
Oh,
signal.
that's so funny. I'm so sorry. Much is going up on this? I literally so I came to the East Bay to my mother-in-law, and her house has diabolical cell phone coverage. So I drove around the area, and I'm parked on the side of the road in Berkeley.
Oh, you're visiting your mother or your mother-in-law? I didn't hear.
But mother-in-law.
Well, that explains it. Whenever I've visited my mother, she has no internet, no technology. I was thinking of buying her a dial-up rotary phone to bring her up into the 20th century. So anyway, I know what it's like
Oh,
to be in that situation. So that explains it. Because like to set this interview up, I'm like, yeah, can we just do a Skype call? And you're like, not exactly. So we're doing the cell phone. Okay, well that explains it. So that's good to know. So I just want listeners to know you and I had a really great conversation about your film, The Phenomenon. It's coming out in September, and for people who haven't heard the first part, I saw it last night with Tracy, and honestly, James, I just thought it was really excellent. People should listen to part one of that if they want to catch up on it. Can I ask you, like,
well, I have a quick question because I'm really curious about this.
yeah,
Is it what you expected? Is it better than you expected? Can you give me an idea?
it was. I don't know if I would say it was better than what I expected because I really did expect something really excellent, and so you delivered. I mean, I know your previous work. I know how good you're able to be, and we had a conversation about this a couple of months ago. So you built it up, and the film easily met and probably exceeded those expectations. So to me, it was a really excellent documentary. The only question I had going in is I didn't know how it was going to be organized. Like I was curious how you were going to put this all together, but you did. I guess I'm thinking like three fundamental, actually four. Seems to me you did four basic segments. You did the early history, you did the UFOs and nukes, you did the kind of modern ATIP / Tic Tac era, and then you did the encounters, focusing on the Zimbabwe case. So, I mean that sounds about right, right? Those four basic.
Yeah, yeah.
And I thought you strung them together like in a very logical way. Like you built the case really well, and where it really actually exceeded anything that I'd hoped for was in your ability to get this rare historical footage. Like all of it was good, but the historical footage that you were able to pull in, particularly in the first segment, like I had not seen so much of that. We talked a little bit about that before. The UN's from 1978, some of the early pilots, the Nash Fortenberry case that I mentioned earlier. Those were probably for me just I got a real thrill out of that. But I thought all of it was great. I thought all of it hung together really well.
People. I remember saying because you think about if you're successful at creating a film that transcend the UFO community and penetrate a much broader audience, which is what I've been trying to do for decades. Gosh, it's like you have to give snapshot history. You just have to do it. And there's going to be some repetitiveness in doing that. But so I was really adamant on a new angle, a new bit of evidence, a new discovery on everything that's been heard before.
Nothing felt repetitive. Like nothing felt old.
What I mean? Yeah.
You did the segment on Lonnie Zamora. And what I liked about that is you get to hear Lonnie Zamora's voice. You get to hear him talking about his case. That's not often the case where you get these old documentaries. He's just sort of a picture and someone's doing a voiceover talking about the case. Here you actually have Lonnie Zamora. You had Lonnie Zamora's wife talking about how that was. I
interviewed Lonnie Zamora's daughter and his brother and his son, Michael. I went to Socorro twice a year, 3 times a year for 5 years straight. I actually bought Lonnie's truck because it was the family truck, and it was just had grass. Every time I kept going over to the house, I would say to his wife, Mary, what's happening with this truck that's out here? It's filled with garbage. I can't drive it anymore since Lonnie died, and it doesn't have power steering. And I said, well, look, if you ever want to sell it. But in any case, so I ended up buying the truck. So now I drive Lonnie's family truck.
Seriously?
Amazing. I did. I restored it. I actually picked up Jacques Vallée in downtown Bolinas, where I live, with the Lonnie Zamora truck, and we all got in the truck together with Lee Spiegel, and we got in the truck and we would drive down a long dirt road to get to the studio. And in driving down that long dirt road, Jacques told me the story about how the Lonnie Zamora case came around with Dr. Hynek, and it's fascinating behind-the-scenes stuff. Dr. Hynek was with Jacques was with Dr. Hynek at Wright Taft in 1964, just a couple days before that case. And they're going through the archives. Jacques was explaining to Hynek, look, you have to look out for the cases that are labeled psychological. Those are close encounters. They just write them right off. So he was explaining this about the significance and all the close encounter cases that were happening in France in the 50s.
Wait. I have to jump in because you cut out at the key moment. You said, Jacques said to Hynek, you have to look at all the cases that are labeled as, what was that? Psychological. Okay. Those are the close encounters.
Yeah, because those are the close encounter cases. And they were just completely dismissed because, it's one thing to see a UFO in the sky, or maybe even as far as taking it on the ground, it's another thing to see little beings, right? So that was psychological. So Jacques was at Wright Taft with Hynek, telling them about these close encounters in France and what to look out for, and that this stuff is happening, that they're real. They separate, and the next day, I believe it was the very next day, Hynek gets a phone call, landing case in New Mexico, Socorro, New Mexico, involving a police officer. Hynek gets on a plane and flies out there. And it was like, Jacques sitting there going, John, I was just there with Hynek when that call came in.
That's remarkable. I never knew that.
Yeah.
That's remarkable.
I know. I didn't know it either. And apparently Hynek fell when he investigated that case and broke his jaw, according to Jacques, and had his jaw wired shut.
Fascinating. By the way, it was very, very cool to see a very young Jacques Vallée from that period of time.
Isn't that
he was a sharp-looking young guy. Had nice haircut, and he was like, I would not have recognized him from 1964-65. I didn't recognize that Jacques Vallée.
We found of Jacques, over the years. The Father Gill case, that encounter, that's another close encounter that was really credible. I didn't look into the 1958 Father Gill case in Papua New Guinea. All these things, in my opinion, were forgotten history, and to bring all those things back to life, it is such an honor to be part of it. I'm so, I'm just so glad that you recognize that aspect of the film, because I was fearful of people going, oh, well, these are rehashed old cases. I'm like,
no,
but we tried to put a new spin in.
They were done in a really fresh way. You reminded me, though, there was one thing that we did not discuss in the first segment of this interview, which kind of wish we had, but I'd like to ask you here, which is you had the whole thing on Jacques Vallée and Gary Nolan, And this artifact, I mean, this has been, circulating in the UFO field. People have been talking about this. There's not a lot of information, even now, that's being released about this. But Jacques Vallée gained access to a UFO artifact that has been studied, and you bring this up in the documentary, at the lab of Dr. Gary Nolan, over at Stanford University, I believe. Is that right? Is that where he is?
Yes. So basically,
Can you talk? Yeah, just talk about this.
What? Yeah. So all I'm going to say is this: Jacques is going to be putting that data, the result of what they're doing, in it published in a scientific journal, and then once that's done, then more specifics will come out about that. We just skimmed the surface with
Right.
this new revolutionary device, and to be in that lab with those two men was such an honor. So exciting, I can't even begin to tell you. Lee Spiegel was there. My other partner, Mark Parrish, was there. I mean, it was just very, very, very exciting,
People realize, the people who've been following this a little bit, they realize something very important is going on there. You did in the film, I mean, permit me just to bring this up, talk about how you had Gary Nolan talking about doing an atomic level analysis of this artifact, and how I mean, I guess the upshot is that no one seems to believe that this is man-made. Is that a fair statement?
I really can't comment on it further than this, but I can say this: when the time is right, I will be happy to bring Jacques on the show and let him talk about it. But that's certainly the implication.
Well, hell, man, one of the words Gary Nolan used to describe it was, I think, ultra material, and he did talk about analyzing the atomic structure of it. So, I mean, it definitely, one is left with the impression of, holy cow, this is some heavy duty analysis that's been going on of this artifact. People are familiar with, because I've talked about this as well, Hal Puthoff's lecture from about a year and a half ago at the Society of Scientific Exploration, where he's talking about the metamaterial, that Linda Moulton Howe had held for many, many years, and that was sent to Art Bell, and then he gives it to Linda, and she shopped around to different scientists, including Puthoff. His talk about that back in 2018 was very interesting to me. But now what we're talking about is something at least as significant as that, it seems to me, if I'm not mistaken. That's the impression that your film gives.
It's incredibly exciting, and I've been trying to get Jacques on board with a major news outlet, and I mean major news outlet, that they want to cover that angle of the documentary, which would be huge for us.
Yes, indeed.
I just don't know how comfortable Jacques is discussing, what's going on there. Obviously, they did it, and they agreed to do it, and they know it's coming out, so that's fair game.
Right.
But I just don't want to go into too much of the details, because I'm getting outside of my comfort zone, and I don't know enough about it to speak intelligently. All that I can say is that there's real science taking place in real labs with real results.
Fair enough.
Leave it at that.
Fair enough. Well, I brought it up because it's in your film, and I thought, hell, I'm going to ask
totally.
you about it.
Totally. I don't blame you at all. No, I'm just being honest with you. I can. There's only so much I can comment on that.
Indeed. Well, it was possibly, of everything in there, and I'm just surprised that I didn't mention this during the previous interview, possibly the most fascinating part of the whole documentary was that brief little tidbit, this little dangling carrot. And clearly, we're going to be wanting more.
I will say this. We went further in the lab that was in the film,
right?
And then because of Nolan's association with Stanford, we had to tone it down, which we did. So we went back to the editor room and we cut a bunch of stuff out.
Wow, yeah. sensitive.
So
Well,
that's why another reason why I got to be really careful.
no, I understand.
I just don't know enough. Yeah,
I
you know
do
what
understand.
I mean. I put my foot in my mouth.
Well, what's good though is that they're clearly moving in a forward direction here in terms of getting their research ready for publication, hopefully getting it out soon. And you just know
Yes.
that's going to kickstart a whole new conversation within the UFO community and hopefully beyond the UFO community. My goodness, it would be a tragedy if it were to remain stuck among those of us, who only care about this and not beyond. I have a feeling this would have the potential to go beyond. Do you? You know more about this than I do. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes, yes, I would. I would agree with that statement. But I think we should move on to other topics at this point.
Sure,
I
sure,
just
sure.
don't want to put my foot in
All
my
right.
mouth. Yeah.
No problem. This conversation.
I'm not trying to be secretive or
Yeah, no, I
coy.
get it.
I just have to be cautious. That's all.
You do.
I really don't know what I'm talking about.
Well, I appreciate what you've said this far, James. So that's great. Any other things, other takeaways you had? I know you've been good friends with Leslie Kane for a long time. You had her in the film. I enjoyed the segment that you had where you interviewed her, just talking a little bit about the back end of how she got the original interview with Lou Elizondo. Were there any other interesting things that you learned about relating to the development of that story?
Yes. And what I didn't realize, and the more I dug into it, I didn't know who was responsible for exposing that story. And there were so many people involved, Leslie and John Blumenthal and, Christopher Mellon was kind of behind the scenes because I didn't know.
Right.
I thought it was PTSD. I thought it was Elizondo that got to the New York Times. But evidently, it was Christopher Mellon that
it's Mellon.
coordinated getting that material out. And they found a loophole.
Yeah.
They found a loophole with that, and I'm sure you know all this, but they found a loophole with the videos. They had them, lowered to a lower classification, and then they walked them out of the Pentagon. Right?
It was a little bit of a sneaky thing that they did. The impression I got is last summer, I think John Greenwald of the Black Vault was talking about Elizondo doing that, and he was actually somewhat critical of Elizondo, saying, that he wasn't really upfront about the videos when he was able to get them cleared. All I kept thinking was, hell, man, we should be patting Elizondo on the back for that. He was a bit, I guess you could say he was coy or a little shady in how he was significantly downplaying the exotic nature of those videos. And the impression that I've always gotten is that's how he was able to get them cleared. And is that your impression as well?
Yes, that's definitely basically what Mellon told me, both on and off camera, is that they found the loophole. It wasn't breaking the law, but they bent the rules, is what he said.
Okay.
And they bent the rules because Christopher Mellon really believes that humanity has a right to know what's going on, whether it's scary or not scary.
Yeah.
All totally, benign or whatever. The public has the right to know, and I commend him for that. I really do. I think he's courageous, and it takes people of his stature to do more of that.
I agree with you.
And another thing is I'll mention quickly that I did not realize is that people were disappointed with the New York Times, and I just thought, well, gosh, why? It's really been amazing what's happened. And it's like, yeah, but the ATIP is only one tiny aspect of the story. The real story was, hey, look, the phenomenon is real. It's happening now. You know what I mean? That was overlooked. That was it was all about this secret Pentagon program, ATIP, and blah, 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 and the money. And but the real story was, hey, UFOs are real.
Well, that's true. I just want to add a couple of things. The significance of Mellon here. In the early years after the release of those videos, I think a lot of the UFO literati that was talking about this believed that it was not Mellon but Jim Semivan who was organizing the media, because he was former, with CIA. And I think that's not the case. It's absolutely Mellon. Mellon has been the driving force behind this more significantly, I think, than any of the other members of TTSA. But then the other thing, relating to the New York Times piece, I did have a nice conversation with Leslie Kean a little while ago about this, and I'm guarding my words here because I don't want to overstep. But it was very evident to me that, and anyone who studies media will understand this, that the three authors, Leslie, Ralph Blumenthal, and Helene Cooper, guess what? They don't have the final word about all of the material that goes into that article. So the New York Times has its own hierarchy. That was obvious to me in talking with her. Not that she said so explicitly to me, but they put certain things in. And if you remember the initial Times article that came out, they had these ridiculously stupid statements by a couple of skeptics, James Oberg being one of them, and I think some Yale astronomer being another, totally irrelevant to any of the information in there. But the New York Times had to make sure that there were skeptical statements in the article. And I didn't ask this explicitly of Leslie, but I'm pretty darn sure that was not their choice. I would bet anything.
No, it was definitely not. Definitely
Yeah.
not their choice. But
Right.
isn't it cool?
Yeah.
Isn't it cool that we correct the record in the movie?
Yes, absolutely. That you got Mellon, and I can't remember what Leslie specifically said. Mellon definitely talked about how the New York Times, in that sense, really dropped the ball. They could have gone so much farther. It could have been so much better. But of course, I mean, in fairness, he's trying to be polite here, but the reality is that the New York Times is never, I'm sorry to say this, but the New York Times leadership will never voluntarily move toward genuine UFO disclosure. I don't see that ever happening. They'll do it in order to maintain control of the narrative.
I think it's so cool that we called them out on it. We back it up, tell the real story, what was missed, the opportunity that was missed. And first of all, I just want to acknowledge the fact that I'm happy they ran with a story. It's a step in the right direction.
Agreed.
But they're going to see when this film comes out, because believe me, I've been in touch with the people at the New York Times. They're going to see when this movie comes out, a big opportunity was missed, and maybe they won't do that the next time.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, they may go there when the public conversation moves so far down the road, they'll have no choice. I mean, that's my assumption. So, and what you're going to be doing when this film of yours is released is you're going to help to move that public conversation down the road just a little bit more. And I'm definitely hoping that it will have some positive effect on their leadership. But I've not forgotten that the New York Times has 75 plus years of consistent UFO debunking, leading up to 2017. The New York Times and the Washington Post, let's not leave them out, with some of the most snarky, illiterate, dumb articles on UFOs imaginable. They've been consistent until 2017, until this happened, which shocked everyone. So, I think the cultural conversation, when that continues to change, and again, your film will have a big part of that, it will undoubtedly force the New York Times to do more coverage, and we'll just see. I mean, to me, I just look at them purely as an establishment tool, always have been. I don't really trust them as an organization, but when they put something decent out on UFOs, as they have done, then that's definitely important. Yeah. Definitely important.
Well, the story reverberated around the world, and I can always judge by the level of viewership on something by how many people reach out to me. And when that New York Times story broke, boy, a lot of people that went up and ran with it. I was contacted by my family members from Singapore, Italy, London, Australia, like, holy shit, maybe you're not so crazy, Pentagon had this secret UFO program. Like, of course they did.
Yeah, right.
You know.
Oh, here's something.
Yeah, sorry.
You didn't get into this too much in the documentary. At least I don't recall. But we've all known there's the ATIP program. Then, like we've learned shortly after that, was the OSAP program that was connected to it. Did you get a sense of any other larger, deeper UFO programs within the Pentagon or anywhere else for that matter when talking with Mellon or talking with Harry Reid or anyone else connected? Did you get a sense of that?
Oh God, that's a very good question. I'd like to think about that one a little bit more, but the impression I got, without a doubt, is that these intelligence agencies were pushing back for a reason. It wasn't just because they didn't feel UFOs were a waste of time. It was more like, don't go there. That was the feeling I got, was that it wasn't pushed back because there's nothing to it. It's pushed back because more in fear that we would uncover that there is something to it. But
Right.
but let me say one other thing, is that everywhere I've gone, from Australia, Africa, South America, when I interviewed the Belgian general de Brouwer,
Wilfred de Brouwers, yeah.
Wilfred de Brouwer, and I kept hearing these stories. And every time there's an encounter, or the fighter jets are scrambled to intercept the UFOs, the radar tapes, there's some unknown U.S. government agency men in suits, plainclothes suits, show up and request for evidence. And I've heard so many times that it's whether it's civilian or even military officials. Parviz Jafari, 1976, Iran, we're telling you the same thing. Government officials are there, American government officials. So there's some government agency that has a global beat on this phenomenon, and they are at locations around the world. And I know this personally because I've spoken to these people personally. I would have to honestly say, probably took me about 15 different times where I've heard this, where I finally went, okay, I've heard enough.
So
No question.
stop right there. I just want to emphasize that. So you are convinced through individuals you have spoken to directly of the existence of a U.S. military program, I'm going to assume, that has global reach in monitoring the entire worldwide UFO situation. Is that pretty much what I thought you said?
1,000% convinced, and it took me 15 years to draw that conclusion. And finally, I can tell you the exact moment it happened.
Yeah.
I was in South America. I was in Virginia for the third time, and I was interviewing the mothers of the girls, for the primary witnesses.
Yeah.
There were a lot of witnesses, but
1996 encounter case.
And she had men in suits. I got this whole thing on camera. Of course, it didn't make it in the movie. She had men in suits show up at her house. One spoke Brazilian. One of them spoke Portuguese, and then the other two, she was assuming, were American, and they were putting significant pressure on her to get daughters to lie and say that they didn't see what they saw. And at that point, I said, "Okay, I've heard enough. I've heard this enough. These guys exist."
Yeah, that's powerful. That's the model that I think has been the case, that the U.S. dominates most of the nations in the world and uses that influence, like in the case of Brazil and like in the case of other nations as well, to control the dissemination of information about this. So very interesting. And you said
they show up. Okay, so if there's compelling evidence, they'll show up. And I mean compelling evidence. And I look, we could go on for 5 hours. I could tell you how many cases I have of evidence that's been confiscated, taken, cut out, civilian and military. I honestly, I could go on all night from all personal stories that I've heard from the people that it happened to, right down to really high-level physicists at recognizable universities, where things have disappeared out of bank vaults and just inexplicable. Like,
yes.
Jesus, really?
Oh, yeah.
Who are these people?
And you spoke to at least one of these people who's part of that global team? Is that what I understood? Okay.
I haven't.
Okay.
I've just spoken
I misunderstood.
to the people that have had it happen to them
Yeah.
so many times.
Right.
I promise you, I could tell you for 5 hours. We could talk just about the cases I've heard.
My
And
God.
I would say 15 years, Richard. 15 years where I didn't not believe it, but I didn't believe it. I just put it in the back of my mind and forgot about it because it didn't fit into my understanding of what was happening. And then just a few years ago, when I was in South America for the third time, and then the mother told me that, I said, okay, I've heard enough. These guys exist.
Incredible. That's incredible.
I know. It's really weird.
Well, like
this is not something I just talk about. I'm not going to go on, Larry King or something and talk about this because people look at me like I'm crazy. But I'm telling you, this has happened to me enough times.
It's obviously going on. James, I know it's probably getting, you probably got other things to do. I'm actually really grateful that you were nice enough to stick around for this après interview. That's what Tracy calls them, the après.
Cool.
Definitely appreciate your time. I'm going to package all of this together, and I'm sure there'll be the first segment we're going to put out on YouTube and on KGRA radio. I'm sure in the near future we'll figure that out, and I'll have these both for my limited audience of members of my website, Richard Dolan members, where it'll just stay there. But I think you're going to have a lot of people very interested in this film when it comes out. It's going to be a really important moment for 2020.
Hey, isn't that funny? Ironically, 2020, vision, the 2020 vision.
Oh, yeah, right.
I think it's going to be a very exciting year, and I appreciate all you do, and I appreciate you having me on the show. I really mean that.
I've enjoyed it, and it's been really enlightening. Well, James Fox, go about your day. You'll be visiting with your mother-in-law, I'm sure, and have a good time. And we'll be in touch. I'm very, very glad we had this chance.
Likewise.
All right. Later, sir. Bye-bye.